E hoki pa, ma ko ia o ko ike ia o ko nui. I ko kako mau kupuna, e hao o ko kako mau, o ika ana ke ia la. E noi aku kako, i ko kako akua. E ho una, aku I kona, ho o mai kai, ana maluna, o ke ia akua koa, a e ho lilo kako ia. Mahalo nui. Aloha kako. It is a pleasure and an honor for myself and my students and my team throughout this week to share our mana'o, our knowledge and opinions. And I feel very, very grateful and honored to do so. And I just want to share how grateful I am as well. All the knowledge that I've been able to glean and gain from all the speakers so far. I've learned so much. And I felt so empowered, so uplifted to be able to hear and listen to all the knowledge and the work, the good work that's being done all over, really all over the world by so many great scholars, so many great people and key figures in our communities. So thank you very much. I appreciate all that has been said so far. I want to just also share my mahalo to Susie and Melissa and all those who are associated with this conference. There aren't too many of these conferences, and I'm very, very honored that and grateful that folks like Susie and others who are really leading out on initiatives and things and discussions like these that are so important for our communities and so important to reach out and connect each other. And I feel grateful for the collective mana that we all share across our islands and across our Pacific Island communities. We all share this kuleana, right? This responsibility to be able to share and to connect and build bridges across our islands and for the improvement of health, mental health across all of our families and so forth. So I'm grateful for this conference. I'm also grateful for the students that are going to be joining me today and for their just their brilliance and the work they're doing as well. And I'll have them introduce themselves if they can right now. If I can have Emily, Abby, and Melia introduce themselves at this point, that would be great.
Great, I'm Emily Tanner. I'm a second-year school psychology student at BYU, working with Dr. Allen in his research, and grateful to be here with you guys. Thanks for having us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Abby Norton. I am a first-year counseling psychology PhD student at BYU, and I have the great privilege of working with Dr. Allen and being part of our Polynesian psychology research team at BYU. And I'm so excited to share our research with you all today. And it's been a great privilege hearing from you so far and learning from you. And I'm really excited for all of this.
Hi, my name is Melia from Moana Garrett. I was born in Laie, Hawaii, but I was mostly raised in Utah. I worked as an elementary school teacher, but I will be starting the school psychology program at BYU in the fall. And I've been lucky enough that Dr. Allen has been letting me help with some of the research, and I'm excited to help present this research today.
Thank you. Okay, so I started off with a little pule, a prayer, to call upon our ancestors, really, to call upon our ancestors to be with us, to be with this conference, to be with this presentation so that we can honor them and make them proud for the work we're trying to do. And really, it can't be done unless they started their work first with their knowledge and their epistemologies, ancient epistemologies. We are learning from them. And I hope we can carry on their legacy through our work and honor them. So I've called upon them and our great Keakua, our God, to be with us during this time. And so let me just share with you the title and just the introduction, brief introduction to our presentation today. So the presentation is called Racial Discrimination Among Pacific Islander Emerging Adults. So let me share my screen. I haven't shared that yet, so you can't see that yet. Hopefully you'll be able to see it within a few seconds. Can you see that? Okay. So I've been doing research in this area for since 2004, actually. And then more recently, over the 10 years, we've been publishing this type of research around ethnicity, racial discrimination, psychological well-being, psychotherapy interventions among Pacific Islander students, well, Pacific Islander communities across the globe. We visited New Zealand and Samoa recently, Hawaii, of course, multiple times, and we hope to continue this work across Micronesia, as well as Melanesia and other South Pacific islands. So I feel grateful to be here at BYU. I've been here for 7 years, and I teach in the doctorate program of counseling psychology. So as you can see here, our presentation is around some research we've done recently around racial discrimination in college students specifically. And just to clarify, Dr. Hoku Conklin will be presenting some racial discrimination research we've done tomorrow. And so mostly I'll be speaking and my students will be speaking for this presentation. And we want to clarify also one thing. Throughout the presentation, you'll come to recognize that we use the word Polynesia or Polynesian intermingled with intermingled with Pacific Islanders, because we hope to gather more samples in the broader South Pacific Islands, which would include Micronesia and all the different islands in that area, that oceanic group, and Melanesia and so forth. But specifically, this sample is targeting those of Polynesian descent, which would be Tongan, Samoan, Hawaiian most specifically. But we hope to expand, of course, across all Pacific Islanders. But just to clarify, we've targeted for this particular research, Tongans, Samoans, and Hawaiians mostly. So with that said, again, grateful to be here. Hopefully this information and knowledge will be of benefit to you, and I will be monitoring the chat box if you have any questions. And then what we'll do is turn it over to our first presenter, Melia, who will be speaking a little bit about some basic introduction and literature review on this research. So I'll turn it over to Melia.
Okay, thank you so much. Can we go to the first slide? Perfect. Okay, the time after graduating high school is pivotal as emerging adults grapple with new responsibilities. They are trying to discover who they are and find their place in society. Unfortunately, BIPOC students have to face another obstacle in that they have increased feelings of racial discrimination. Those that enroll in higher education often are exposed to more discrimination because many racial minorities lack equal opportunities in education. Older adults who have had more exposure to racial discrimination often have developed coping skills to deal with these issues and therefore are better equipped to deal with these higher levels of psychological stress. Racial discrimination is felt across all ethnic minority groups within the United States. It has many adverse effects. It makes BIPOC individuals more prone to feelings of hopelessness and stress. This social stress also gives them more feelings of anxiety, anger, and lower self-esteem. Those that experience the stress of racial discrimination are more likely to develop depression. In fact, it can affect their overall mental and physical health. Polynesians have experienced many of these negative psychological effects of discrimination. Racial discrimination has been found to increase rage, depression, anxiety, and stress among Polynesian individuals. One of the most prevalent forms of discrimination is in the form of microaggressions. Microaggressions are casual, subtle, offensive, and most often unintentional comments or actions that can lead students to feel downgraded, unimportant, and incompetent. These microaggressions can be felt daily by BIPOC individuals across the world. Fortunately, there are coping strategies that have been found to help lessen the effects of racial discrimination. Using family support and religious or spiritual living can help lessen these effects. Polynesians who develop a higher self-esteem are better able to deal with racial discrimination. Higher levels of education have been found to help individuals cope. However, many Polynesian college students continue to feel the mental and physical negative effects of discrimination. Universities and colleges have found that their services are underutilized among the BIPOC community. Many BIPOC individuals are more hesitant to seek help. When they do seek help, they have been diagnosed with higher distress levels than European American students. Despite this issue, there is serious lack of research surrounding their psychological well-being and what can be done to improve this situation. Polynesian students have been found to be better able to cope when they lean on family support and religion. They have higher levels of mental health when they have a strong racial and ethnic identity. Professionals who have a greater understanding of the unique issues BIPOC individuals face are more effective. It is important that they take the time to understand presenting concerns, utilization rates, and therapy outcomes to better reach these individuals. Oh, can we go on to the next slide? Perfect. So the purpose of these studies was to analyze the effects of racial discrimination on the mental health of Polynesian emerging adults and college students, discover the utilization and dropout rates of mental health services among Polynesian students, identify psychological concerns, issues, and emotional difficulties among Polynesian college students, find if Polynesian students report racial discrimination, physical abuse, and family issues differently than European American students, and provide much needed research regarding the psychological well-being of Polynesian college students.
Great, thank you. So to reach the purpose of these studies, we have two different studies that we've done in the last few years to look further at the racial discrimination among Polynesian emerging adults and college students. So that literature applies to both of these studies that we'll talk about, and just overall a general lack of research among Polynesians living in America, and especially the emerging adult age. So we wanted to further look at what those experiences are like for those individuals. So our first study was looking at emerging adults ages 17 to 29 years old that were part of a larger survey sample that took a survey asking questions about a wide variety of different issues, psychological outcomes, and mental health, especially related to experiences of discrimination. So we had 423 individuals in that age range of different Polynesian heritage that took this survey. And we used several different measures to look at these outcomes that we were trying to find. If you want to go to the next one, Kawika. So we looked at racial discrimination, depression, anxiety, stress, anger, self-esteem, and satisfaction with life. So we use these specific measures and scales because they are very commonly used in research among other BIPOC groups and in the discrimination literature in general. But not much research has been done, like I said, among Polynesians residing in the US, so we wanted to better understand their experiences. So for the next study, this was done in 2016 with Dr. Allen and Dr. Conklin. They looked at a specific university that had a counseling center, and they took counseling intake forms from 1996 to 2013 to see what these counseling experiences were like for Polynesian college students and for European American college students. So we specifically were looking to see what differences occurred in these counseling settings and this like personal feelings about counseling. So there were 415 Polynesian college students in this time frame that had filled out this counseling intake. And there were, I think if you can click a couple more, I think there are 18,000 European Americans. So a lot more European Americans in this sample, but we wanted to look at the differences in the longevity of counseling, in their specific outcomes for psychological outcomes, and just their overall satisfaction with the therapy relationship and the process. So the mean age was 22, just so you have an idea of how old these individuals were. And we used the intake forms had a few different measures that they used, including a demographic questionnaire, the FCS, which is a family concern survey, which asks questions about family history, such as parental divorce, mental health in the family, and other presenting concerns. And then the PPC was a presenting problems checklist, which asked just general questions of overall well-being and mental health, and common contributing factors to those outcomes on college campuses, such as classes, homesickness, time management, but most importantly and relevant to our study was ethnic and racial discrimination, those experiences. And in that intake, it also had an outcome questionnaire for counseling. So when counseling was terminated, they looked at measures that measured progress across 3 different domains of experiences, which was symptom distress, so how bad their symptoms were, if there was any improvement, interpersonal relationships, which measured how they were able to function in if there were still impairments in their relationships, and then social roles, which was functioning at work, at school, and in other social settings. So those were the 2 studies, just a general outline of what we were working with for those. And to analyze all this data that we collected, we used a few different analyses. So first, we used Pearson product correlations, which looked at the relationship between racial discrimination and all these psychological outcomes that we talked about. And then we use regression analyses to examine if racial discrimination predicts any of these outcomes, psychological outcomes. So this would just mean that it's a stronger relationship that it predicts rather than it's just related to each other. So racial discrimination could contribute a lot more to these outcomes. And then we did a point by serial correlation to look at if education level was related or had a relationship with racial discrimination, which was mentioned in the literature review. So we looked at if having like the level of education that you achieved, if it affected your experiences of racial discrimination, how often it occurred, how prevalent it was, those types of things. And then lastly, we did a cross-goal Wallace test for significant differences. We use this with the presenting problems checklist just to look at the relationships, assessing these item per item scores.
Okay, great. Thank you, Melia and Emily. So I'll take over this section and discuss a little bit about the results, the findings that we had from these 2 specific studies. One, emerging adults from 17 to 29, like it was described, and the other study was around college students, most likely 18 to 23, 24. So let me share a little bit first about the emerging adult study. And by the way, this emerging adult study, 17 to 29, is actually Emily Tanner's master's thesis, which she successfully defended. And so we're presenting on this thesis from her project. So grateful for her work on this. Anyway, if you take a look at these correlations, just to kind of briefly describe, if you take a look at the highlighted and the yellow highlights, you'll see that racial discrimination is positively correlated, which means it's positively related to depression, anxiety, and stress, as well as anger. And the reason why I say positively is because the more one experiences, particularly Polynesian Americans or Pacific Islanders, experience racial discrimination, their levels of depression and anxiety and stress, as well as anger, most likely increase as well. So there's a direct link, a direct association, and it's statistically significant. So we found, this is a pretty major finding. Again, these are just correlations, but it gives us an idea of the possible links, hopefully that will lead up to some other stronger inferences like predictions and causal effects. But for now, just to share with you, these are associations that are connected to racial discrimination, just to give us an idea. Again, depression, anxiety, stress go up as one experiences racial discrimination. Among these college students and emerging adults of Pacific Islander heritage, And then we also notice that there's a negative, if you take a look here, negative correlation or negative connection, association with self-esteem and satisfaction with life. So the more one experiences racial discrimination, the more one feels less about themselves, if you will, or their self-esteem decreases. Their sense of self, their self-worth, self-efficacy all decreases when they experience these sort of daily microaggressions like Melia was talking about, these daily micro insults or assaults that happen to Pacific Islanders on a daily basis. So their self-esteem is impacted in a negative way, as well as satisfaction with life on a daily basis. That also decreases as one experiences these incidents of racial discrimination. So that gives us a little bit of an idea of these simple correlations. Now, if we want to sort of increase the predictability or the causality of these links or associations, we then move to more of a strict or more sophisticated statistical analysis called simple linear regression. And there is even more sophisticated or robust analyses beyond this, but let me just share this. So we know that based on the links and associations, we know that now it is clear that racial discrimination, based on these regressions that we ran, racial discrimination significantly predicted depression among college students who are Pacific Islanders. We know this clearly. There was a clear prediction. So there's a cause and effect, right? We also know that it significantly predicted anxiety. So some of the anxiety issues that these college students or emerging adults might experience are directly involved or attributed to racial discrimination. Another, which I'll talk about more here in a bit, is stress. So when individuals experience stress and likewise vice versa, racial discrimination, there is a direct association and a predictable association with stress when one experiences racial discrimination. And we wanted to run this variable, this factor related to anger among emerging adults or college students, Pacific Islanders, because the conference, the title of this conference this weekend is Domestic Violence and Racial Discrimination, or Domestic Violence and Racism among Pacific Islanders, right? And so we thought it would be interesting and important to see if there is any correlation or link between anger, racial discrimination, and domestic violence. As you know, anger is a trigger for domestic violence, and they're correlated with each other. So we also found here in this last bullet point, racial discrimination significantly predicted anger as well among college students who are Pacific Islanders. And then for another sort of step up or more sophisticated and robust statistical analysis, we went to a third level. And that third level is called multiple regression. And we did a stepwise multiple regression. So what we mean by that is, stepwise is we're looking at various factors in a sort of step-by-step process of what accounts for and what contributes the most to anger related to stress and depression, anxiety, racial discrimination, and satisfaction with life. So we wanted to look at these variables to see which predicted the most in the variance or the relationship or explaining the relationship related to anger among these Pacific Islander college students. So depression wasn't significant, so we took depression out. That wasn't a significant link or an association. We took depression out, we took out self-esteem. That wasn't statistically significant. But the three factors that were most significant in terms of contributing to anger among these Pacific Islander college students and emerging adults were stress, racial discrimination, and satisfaction with life. Now, we knew that racial discrimination was a part of that anger, which we could possibly assume that might lead to some incidents of domestic violence. But let's just keep it at anger first. We knew that, but we didn't know that racial discrimination at the very top, at the second level, was contributing at the second most to anger. Now, this was the most interesting, stress. So if you can see here, just take a look at, whoops. So take a look at these three red, or numbers in red. These are beta, standard coefficients. So we looked at beta because these are standardized numbers or coefficients to allow us to know how to kind of comprehend these numbers and make them more usable for our understanding. So at the top of the list, stress made the strongest contribution in explaining the outcome for anger among Pacific Islander students. Stress. So this is very applicable, right? There are some clinical implications around understanding stress and stressors. Whatever stressors are for Pacific Islanders, we need to pay attention to those in the helping fields, those who are psychotherapists, social workers, those who are a part of this field of helping the mental health of our people. They need to know that there are specific stressors out there, whether it be familial stress, stresses that come from family, interpersonal stress in relationships and families, stress from work, employment, stress from marriage, stress from a number of various stressors. So this was the #1 strongest contribution in explaining anger among this sample. And the second close to that was just slightly lower at 0.23, just below 0.25. At 0.23, we have racial discrimination. Slightly over, but still made a contribution in explaining anger among this population. So if we combine stress, and if we include also racial discrimination, and if you incorporate all the racial insults and the racial microaggressions, and you add in there stress, and the stressors that account for many of these individuals, this definitely has a strong link and predictable link to anger and increasing one's anger. Thus, possibly, we haven't studied this yet, but this could also lead to a possibility of some violence or domestic violence. So again, we're looking at links in what could be predictable in one's behavior. So again, stress, racial discrimination, leading to anger, and anger possibly leading to domestic violence or any sort of violence or abuse. So just kind of keep that in your mind as we go throughout this part of the results section. And then lastly, #3, here, satisfaction with life. So low satisfaction with life, right? So we also found that it wasn't the top 2, but low satisfaction with life also predicted anger, one's anger, as well as the interconnection with racial discrimination and stress. And so this was among the individuals of college students at that age group. Okay, moving forward. We also found looking at running an analysis around educational level, right? And so we asked individuals what were their educational levels from less than high school degree, all the way up to professional degree, right? Some college, 2-year, 4-year college degrees, master's degree, and then professional degree, PhD, MD, JD, and so forth. And the only significant result finding that we found, although small, but still significant result, was less than high school, meaning those who endorsed less than high school or high school degree experienced more levels of racial discrimination or experiences of racial discrimination on a daily basis. Okay, and so this gives us again more information about education. How does education impact one's experiences of racial discrimination? And so we'll talk a little bit about that, maybe some implications around that. And then lastly, let's see. Lastly, I want to share among these Pacific Islander college students, we wanted to find out specifically among these students, what sort of issues of academics, adjustment to university, alcohol, concentration, all of these different factors, we wanted to find out at an item level, each one of these, if there are any differences between Pacific Islanders and white students on a particular campus. And this campus was a majority white campus, majority white students. But we wanted to find out what were the differences. So all of these, all of these items were actually significant in terms of differences between Pacific Islanders and white students, meaning Pacific Islanders scored higher and endorsed higher levels of all of these items, all of them, all of these items compared to white Americans. Okay, all of them: irritability, anger, hostility, making friends, rape, sexual assault, relationship with family, tests, speech, anxiety, all of these items. But one in particular, which I have highlighted here in yellow, I wanted to share with you. Notice the chi-square number here, the chi-square number, 231.6. This is directly related to ethnic and racial discrimination. This is higher than any other number, statistical number in this analysis. Now, this is a mean rank, and so this first category is distress. When they first came into the counseling center, they endorsed this high level of distress right when they came in on the first session of counseling, psychotherapy, right? They endorsed this high, more than white Americans, more than a lot of different other students across the student body on this campus, right? This particular university. And so this is the distress level at that snapshot on that day. Now look at the duration. Now the duration was at least 3 to 4 weeks duration of these symptoms. Again, look at the chi-square estimate, 222.4, compared to all of these other scores. This was a gigantic, huge finding related to what are these college students experiencing? They're experiencing racial discrimination, racism on a daily basis on our college campuses, much more than homesickness, much more than difficulty making friends, rape, sexual assault, all of these other major issues and factors, concentration, alcohol, and drugs. They're experiencing this more than any other issue on college campuses. Now, this is something we didn't know this before. We didn't know this about Pacific Islander students before. Okay, this sort of symptom, the duration was longer than any other, particularly white students and any other students on campus. And so this led us to think, hey, this is an issue among our people on college campuses. What are the outreach services? What are the things that we're doing to reach out to these individuals? Are we addressing this and reconciling these issues of microaggressions and racism on campus for these students? And so these are just some of the results that were compelling, and hopefully you will be able to kind of understand, and we're looking for some discussion around this towards the end of our presentation, and some questions that you might have, and maybe even some interpretations of why this is the case. Why are our college students experiencing these things? So moving on forward with discussion, I'll turn time over now to Abby to discuss more around this section. Then we'll open it up after for Q&A and have some discussion after.
Thanks, Dr. Allen. Dr. Allen has shared a number of findings from our research. I'd like to share some other ones with you. The first was that our research sought to identify the mental health outcomes associated with racial discrimination among Polynesian individuals. Our research revealed that experiences of racial discrimination predicted an increase in depression, anxiety, and stress. This finding is corroborated by previous research suggesting an association between racial discrimination and poor mental health outcomes among Polynesians, including anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, and suicide. We were also interested in understanding other outcomes of discrimination among these individuals. We found that discrimination is correlated with lower levels of self-esteem, satisfaction with life, and an increase in anger. Actually, research conducted in New Zealand concluded that racial discrimination is significantly associated with poor self-health ratings, smoking, cardiovascular disease, lower physical functioning, as well as those poor mental health outcomes. Given the outcomes of racial discrimination on Polynesian mental health and well-being, we wondered about experiences with racial discrimination across education levels of Polynesian individuals. And our research revealed that having a high school degree or less education is significantly correlated with an increase in experiences of racial discrimination. Despite efforts to improve academic and workplace opportunities for minoritized groups, inequality and prejudice persist. These disparities include hiring disadvantages, wage inequality, and exclusion in social settings. Research has shown that higher levels of education have been shown to provide individuals with better coping skills, problem-solving skills, and develop better resources for coping with discrimination. Our research also revealed that ethnic identity does not mediate the relationship between stigma and satisfaction with life for Polynesian people, which was actually fairly surprising for us. This finding runs contrary to previous research, which suggests that ethnic identity is a protective factor for mental health among minoritized groups, suggesting that ethnic identity as a protective factor may not be generalizable to Polynesian individuals. Our research also suggests that understanding and attending to the cultural needs of Polynesian clients is essential for a strong therapeutic alliance. Which brings me to the limitations for our study. First and foremost, the majority of participants in this research were affiliated with the same religion. Along those same lines, the mean age of participants were in their early 20s, meaning that the results of these studies may not be generalizable across Polynesian students of all ages. The demographic factors for Polynesian students, including socioeconomic status and education level, may also differ from the Polynesian population as a whole. There were lots of implications from our research. The first is that we believe future research should compare Polynesian emerging adults to older adults to see what psychological differences occur due to racial discrimination. We believe the research should look specifically at acculturation, societal pressure, and historical trauma as a result of colonization, and how these things impact mental health outcomes, life satisfaction, and self-esteem among these individuals. We also believe that future research should address education as a protective factor against the negative effects of discrimination. Polynesian individuals with post-secondary education are less likely to experience the negative mental health effects of stigma. We hope that future research will clarify these findings and offer insight into implications for education, policy, and advocacy. We also feel strongly that future research should explore racial discrimination and other psychological outcomes among BIPOC students. Members of the BIPOC community are constantly subjected to racial discrimination, stigma, and microaggressions. We hope that future research will make their experiences heard and shed light on ways clinicians, advocates, educators, and researchers can make a difference as we work together to eliminate racism and social injustice. The fourth is we believe that future research should address ethnic identity and cultural mental health stigma among Polynesians. We believe that future research can help us understand the cultural and intrinsic stigma surrounding mental health among Polynesians. We believe research will also help us to understand how stigma impacts the utilization of mental health resources, life satisfaction, and mental health of Polynesians. Our research also brought about a number of recommendations for clinicians, the first being ethnic matching. Anyone who might not be familiar with ethnic matching, it's actually when a client who's going to therapy and the clinician are matched so that they're of the same ethnic background. And our research indicated that many Polynesian clients would prefer to meet with a Polynesian therapist. Although some clients expressed that they would be willing to meet with a white therapist, they stress the importance of a white clinician understanding their cultural background and taking time to experience and learn more about their culture. We also believe that clinicians should avoid combining Polynesians with people from other distinct cultural backgrounds. Due to ethnic glossing, Polynesians are often grouped with Asian Americans in research. However, Asian Americans and Polynesians have different presenting concerns in therapy, they utilize mental health resources at different rates, and they have different outcomes in therapy. To best serve members of both communities, their cultural differences should be recognized in research, clinical practice, and training. We also believe that clinicians should take time to get to know their clients and develop cultural understanding. Our research revealed that Polynesian clients measure the quality of therapy with a non-Polynesian therapist by the therapist's history of immersing themselves in Polynesian culture. Therapists should also be aware of the authority and power they hold in session and should develop an understanding of societal challenges and power dynamics stemming from a history of colonization across the Pacific. We also believe that clinicians should work to attend to unique presenting concerns, collectivistic worldviews, and act in coordination with students' families and religious communities. We found that family plays a big part in whether Polynesian people use psychological services. Participants didn't want to burden family members with personal challenges, and they felt the need to be strong and support and contribute to their family's well-being. Attending therapy may suggest that they can't handle familial responsibilities or are facing issues that would bring shame to their family name or undermine the support and care their family has provided them throughout their life. Research also suggests Polynesians prefer to use spiritual outlets such as prayer, fasting, and reading religious texts to mitigate mental health concerns. Our final recommendation for clinicians is attending to cultural methods for handling distress and maintaining psychological well-being. Counseling and counseling interventions are not a one-size-fits-all approach. Clinicians should work with clients to identify specific cultural self-care practices or interventions that meet their needs, and should be open to the idea that what works for one client may not work for another. We hope that by recognizing the unique cultural identity of Polynesian clients, clinicians can strengthen their relationships and offer clients a more robust, culturally competent approach to mental health practice.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Mahalo nui for your attention. And so at this point, let me open it up for questions. Any thoughts? Let me just stop sharing here. And I'm sorry, I didn't attend to the chat down below. I apologize. So I'm very behind on some of the thoughts in chat. Can we open it up for a few minutes at this point, Melissa?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to lift that there were two questions that were way early in the presentation. One was about a particular slide that there were details shared before it was a college student study. They wanted to know what was the date range for the surveys. And then there was a second question, is there aggregated data on the study that reflects what generation these students were, whether they were first or second gen American?
That's excellent. So yeah, I'm seeing that right now. So for the first question, the details shared before college student study was the date range of the survey. So for the college student survey, that one was from 1996 to 2013. So about a 13-year span of looking at repeated measures every year, these students coming into counseling centers and taking these surveys, taking these measurements, and then being and sort of endorsing these things over a period of actually really long-term longitudinal sort of study. So yeah, that was from 1996 to 2013 at this particular college campus. And then the next question was, is there aggregated data on this study that reflects what generation these students were? Yeah. So unfortunately for that particular study, we were not able to ascertain that type of data, that information. And we learned the hard way, because that would have been a beautiful way to kind of look at factors, other types of factors of first, second, third generation, assimilation, acculturation factors of how long they've been in the US, their language abilities and that sort of thing in Tongan or Samoan language. And so that would have been good information to have. And then our follow-up study, we learned from that one study where we didn't gather that data, and we included that question in terms of first generation, second generation, how long they've been living in the US, where were they born, what languages they speak, how fluent do they feel they're fluent in their language, and so forth. So hopefully the current study that we have now will shed some light on that sort of question in terms of generation and so forth. So thank you for those questions. Those are really good.
Emily was able to go into the chat and respond to some of the other questions that were presented during the presentation. Martha asked, they want your contact information. And then do we know if they sought support, and if so, what was the outcome? That's from Lori.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So for the college students specifically, when they came to this counseling center at this college campus, they came in for the first session, and our research also shows that because Polynesians or Pacific Islanders don't typically use psychological services or counseling or psychotherapy, they tend to use that service as a last resort, if you will, right? Because they may not be used to it, or they may have some stigma or feel negatively towards it, or have negative views around seeking help in that way. So when they ultimately decide to come in the first session, their distress level is so high that that's why across other students, their scores are so high, because they've exhausted every other resource, whether it be family, friends, social groups, any other sort of resource for help. They've exhausted all of those, and this is sort of the last resort. So they've come with such a high distress level because this is the last option they have, right? And so that's partly why their levels are so high at intake. However, we've noticed that as the first session goes by, second session, then by the third session in psychotherapy or counseling, they typically drop off or drop out of counseling. There's a high attrition rate or no-show rate among Pacific Islanders, where they come in for the first session with this just heightened distress level. They come in for the second session, then they leave by the third session. And we believe the reason behind that, we believe, is one, as Abby was saying, there's not an ethnic matching between Polynesian clients and Polynesian therapists. Well, how many Polynesian therapists do we have? Pacific Islander therapists, right? That should indicate right now that we don't have a lot of therapists, right? That's one. So they may not find any cultural connection. They may distrust their non-Polynesian or non-Pacific Islander therapist, which would then lead them to this, why should I go back if they won't understand me, if they don't understand who I am, where I come from, my cultural values, my cultural belief systems, and so forth. So that those are some of the issues that we're understanding, and then possibly when they come in for the first or second sessions, because the distress level is so high, they were able to at least release those emotions, right? They were able to release those pervasive thoughts or emotions related to their distress level, other stressors, and so they might have found some help at that point, and they didn't find the need to come back. But we're finding, though, that that's just sort of the initial distress reduction phase, right? We find that there's much more work that needs to be done to kind of peel away, so to speak, peel away what's happening down beneath, right? The underlying issues of these Pacific Islanders. So they have the initial decrease of these, a reduction of these symptoms, but it really doesn't get to the point or the issue, the core issues of what's happening in their lives. So they leave, but they never get help again. And so it really is upon them to seek out help after that, right? Because there's not enough time to really get to the core issues.
Can I just ask a follow-up question to that? So earlier in the presentation, there was a mention, and I'm not sure if it was like a coping mechanism or what students would do should they start to begin to be distressed. And I wonder if religion played a big factor for the Pacific Islander students. And I say that because in the work that I do here, a lot of the reason why it's not necessarily the stigma anymore, it's just they rely heavily on their faith and their faith leaders for support around mental behaviors or issues that they might be having. And I understand that, having the confidence of a faith leader, someone that you look up to or as a mentor, can provide some of that. But I was wondering if the students were saying that, clinical support or a therapist was the last result because, they wanted to exhaust working with faith leaders and other folks in the community. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Sure, no problem. That's a really good question. So more of the recent studies we've had, particularly some qualitative research we're doing some interviews with Pacific Islanders, and we're coming to find that one of their first sources of help is actually their faith leader, whether that's a bishop, stake president, or a pastor, priest, or a member of their congregation. They are reaching out to them first. That's their first line of help, because that's more socially acceptable. Maybe that's more culturally acceptable to go to our bishops or go to our faith leaders, right? And so the family is more likely to be okay and accept that possibility of help, rather than go to a therapist and an outside source for professional services, right? Which is probably what's needed. But then once they've gone to them, their faith leaders, again, and you've brought this up, Melissa, and some of the research is showing they've also exhausted that resource. They've exhausted that source of help where they're finding, yes, I'm connected to my spiritual identity. I'm connected to my faith. I'm connected to reading my scriptures or praying or whatever the religion may be. But the mental health struggles persist. Yeah. They're still here, right? They still are prevalent in one's life. And so faith does help, absolutely. The faith leader may help, absolutely. I agree with this. However, there are certain limits and certain thresholds where folks that may not understand that you need actual professional services beyond a faith leader or a bishop who are competent professionals. They know what they're doing. They base their practices on research and science that help and serve the communities. And so there's a gap or discrepancy from faith leader to actually moving and transitioning to an actual professional or a therapist. So there's a delay in that transition, and we're trying to find out why they're not moving from their faith leader to an actual professional who could actually help them with hopefully real evidence-based treatments.
Or
right?
even in concert, right? So it doesn't have to be one or the other or one after the other, but if not in concert, right? Okay, I know I'm talking too much and I'm the MC. So anyone else have any questions or
No, well, I was just going to share real quick. You're right, Melissa. So we found that multiple resources of help actually lead to the best, more long-lasting outcomes, long-lasting help. Really salient healing can come from seeing your faith leader to kind of address those spiritual issues that one might have when they go to their bishop or whatever, as well as going to a professional to address these real mental health issues that they may have. So the combination of the two actually lead to greater outcome, more positive outcomes in their mental health. Yeah, that's a good point.
I think part of it, Melissa, and thanks for the work, Kawika, is that our generation, or actually those that are older, have always had a stigmatism looking at mental health as the cuckoo medicine. Like in the Ton community, if you have mental issues, you're known as the Fasciceli or the crazy one. But in reality, you can't help your biochemistry. That's something that, and even though we're further along and we know that this is actually a brain chemistry thing, it's not just, quote unquote, something you're born with or something you became or evolved into. It's just hard getting over that speed bump. I think the next generation might have a better acceptance of understanding that, because they've grown up understanding that mental health is real and it's not just, quote unquote, a nebulous science. It's actually part of our everyday fiber. And the crazy thing is I think I'm using the word crazy loosely here. The impactful thing here is that once we accept and understand that mental health is a condition, as a people, it'll be much more easier for us. It's easier for us as people to hide and say, oh, you're weak. You don't have mental problems. You're just a weak person. it's easier as coming from the strength of being bred as a warrior that, we can do anything, blah, 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 we've got this, but inside we're dying. We're mentally dying. Physically, yes, I can take down the whole Chinese army, but mentally, I am about the size of a rodent, if on a good day. And I think there's going to be a lot of work that needs to evolve in this space. And it's a great segue because tomorrow I'll be hosting Dr. Foliaki, who's coming in from New Zealand, who they flew him out from New Zealand to come to Nevada to get a man off of death row. So he was able to, with his work, prove to them that he wasn't worthy of death row, and they took him off death row. But these are things that when you have our people talking to us, we resonate with things that we understand culturally, and also are more easy to listen to, rather than always thinking, oh, here comes the guy in the white suit, he's going to take you away to the crazy hospital. And that's not the case. We need to stop somehow break past the image that mental health means bad. Mental health is just that. It's mental health. It's like having diabetes. It's like having something, it's like having, a different type of MS. It's a disease that can be cured, but you have to be knowledgeable enough to accept that the information that's being given to you by a professional will help you.
Mighty Paul Tuivai, that was well said. Very, very well said. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's exactly what it is. I guess maybe about a year ago, we did a research around stigma in Polynesian men, a stigma around mental illness and psychotherapy, and men compared to women, Pacific Islanders, showed a lot more stigma, a lot more negative views, endorsed a lot more hesitation in seeking professional help, because I think you said it correctly, Paul. We want to maintain this level of strength, appearing strong, and we don't want to show weakness, right? To show weakness, that means we're not the warrior. We're not the warrior that everyone says that we should be, right? And so, and it would be weak for us to share our emotions, to feel and to share our feelings in a psychotherapy session with another man, even, or another woman therapist. That would just show weakness. So we don't go. We go to other sources of help, and most of those are maladaptive, right? Unhealthy ways of helping us, self-medicating or whatever it may be. We numb those feelings with other ways instead of going to a professional. But you're absolutely right. The research endorses what you just said. There's some cultural indicators of why Polynesian men are not going to therapy.
Great point. I want to ask a question, but would anyone else like to ask a question, make a comment? We welcome it all. I want to share the air.
Go ahead, Melissa. Maybe yours will trigger someone else.
Okay, great. So I think for me, what's really challenging, what might be even more challenging than getting our community to access mental health support is unlearning the stigma that culturally impacts the way that we think about it. Right? There's not even a word for mental health in the Tongan language, and I can't speak for any of the other communities, but if there's not even a word to validate that it's physiological, then our community still suffers and subscribes to your family is cursed, that's why they have a child like that, or you disrespected someone and, or your fahu talatukirani, or, whatever it could be, which I'm not saying is not true and doesn't happen, but what I'm saying is, how do we help our community unlearn that? I struggle to get our community to resources, even though we have huge, we have statistics locally here in the Bay Area that our young people are suffering in silence, that they are depressed, that they don't feel safe talking to their parents, they don't feel safe talking to school resources, they don't feel safe talking to any adult, but they find a lot of safety and comfort in social media, in their friends, and other peers that don't necessarily have their best interests. So what would you recommend in your research, which by the way, I want a copy of it. What would be your recommendation and how we can start having these conversations on on a micro level so that it could have macro impact? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Very good question. So the way I would respond to that is one, education, psychoeducation, education around psychology and demystifying, deconstructing psychology and what Pacific Islander families might think about what psychology is, and not be afraid of psychologists or therapists that they're going to screw up my children. All of these perceptions, negative perceptions, have to be kind of challenged, right? And the only way we do this is more education. I think maybe the older generations may not understand that there are actual real ways through therapy, psychotherapy, based on years and years of evidence, scientific evidence, that this actually helps. This actually helps people. It doesn't hurt people. It's not harmful. You might have a few cases here and there, some rare cases where, you know, a therapist does something or does whatever to harm someone, but those are sort of rare occasions. Most therapists, psychotherapists, psychologists are trained at least with 4 or 5 year degrees. They go to school for a very long time. They're trained by multiple people from multiple perspectives, and they become very equipped with proper training to help and to assess what's going on with individuals. And so some of the skepticism or the stigma, in some ways, gently has to be challenged with just more education, right? And so, you know, psychoeducation, educating the parents, educating folks, maybe the older generation, educating people around the benefits of counseling, the benefits of therapy, and going to a person who fits you the best, and where you can find the most healing out of that one best fit therapist, right? Now, I would also suggest, Melissa and others who are thinking about this, now, I know that, so like I said, there are different types of resources that can come to help someone. Faith, religion, family, social groups, social support, friends, and so forth. All of these actually help the individual on their path to healing, right? But with faith and other things, it gets to a point where individuals, because of their distress level, they may need a little bit more. So what I'm saying is, they may need some psychotropic medication, which is medicine, right? Medicine has been shown to help in regulating the levels of neurotransmitters and the firing of neurons and the regulation of dopamine and serotonin in your brain to be able to regulate your mood on an everyday basis. And so some people don't believe that medication or psychotropic medications could actually help. People think that it's hogwash, it doesn't work, or I don't want to put any of that in my system and it's going to do worse for me. While yes, you need to have the right dosage, and yes, you have to have the right medicine for you, but once you have that right percentage and the right medicine, the right dosage, they actually do help your mood.
Great.
Combined with psychotherapy, right? Psychotherapy combined with medicine proves to be the most effective way of treating psychological struggles. Research has shown this multiple times over years of research. And so again, psychoeducation, talking to families and parents around it's okay. It's okay, like Paul said, it's like going to a doctor about diabetes or cancer or a common cold or whatever you have to go to a doctor for. It's the same thing. Go to a therapist for those same things. It's okay, and it should be acceptable to go to a therapist to work on our emotions, our psychological states, and so forth. We just have to normalize it. And it comes from these discussions we're having here. It comes from more, like I said, more education, but we have to intentionally intentionally normalize this as it's okay to do this in our families and in our culture. Just normalize it.
Awesome.
Hopefully that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And can you write me a prescription later? Just kidding.
Okay.
Any other questions?
It looks
Comments?
like
Waving.
looks like Carolina has her hand up. I think I recognize Carolina.
Yes, I see Carol.
Carolina is my wife, actually. Thank you, honey, for attending this session.
So we'll go to Carol.
Oh, this is
We'll
great.
go to George and Nina. Go ahead, Carol. Thank you.
Okay. Well, my question is about the research, because I think I've been following what everyone's saying, and it's very fascinating. It's really important. But, correct me if I'm wrong, the research that was done really had the strong emphasis, or what the finding was that like racial microaggressions, that those things greatly contribute to the stress level, which is making things extremely difficult for BIPOC people. And so my question is, it can be a real challenge to maybe change the way other people view people of color. But what is it that we can take control of as people of color to be resilient in the midst of challenging external situations, if that makes sense? So I guess my question is, if I'm going about living my life, it's really hard for me to control how other people view me and what their issue is. That's on them. But as me, as an individual, as a person of color, what can I do to kind of regain and empower myself so that I can navigate these things with greater resilience, so that I'm not the one that's suffering for what issues other people have? Does that make sense? So I guess my question is, as a person of color, I would love tools that would help me to become more empowered and more resilient. And so I guess that's my question. What, from the study that you did, is there anything that has come up in that vein?
Yeah, so thank you, honey, for that really complicated question. We'll have a discussion about that later. So it's a very good question, honey. So the way I would respond to that is, there's this notion of resilience, right? Resilience, mental toughness, mental hardiness. And in the field of psychology, over the years, many years, folks have been studying this idea of mental toughness. And this actually also relates to everyday racial discrimination experiences among people of color, BIPOC, persons of color, right? And so we come to find that depending on how one was raised, their environment in which their resilience was either pushed down or enhanced by caregivers, parents, and so forth, would really determine how they internalize those experiences of racial discrimination in their life, right? And so if one, psychologically speaking, if one had this mental resilience of, you know what, this person's an idiot, they don't know what they're talking about, they just don't know me, I'm better than this, I can overcome that, I have this sort of mental toughness, and I can move on and overcome. If that person at that level has that sort of resilience that could kind of talk themselves out of that, then yes, that's absolutely right. That is preferred, right? If one would have that resilience to kind of move on with that. But if that person didn't have sort of that mental capacity or resilience to overcome these constant barrage of racial issues and racial discrimination experiences every day, it can take a toll, and it can exhaust somebody. It's very exhausting experiencing these issues every day. And even the most resilient people can get really pretty pissed off, excuse my language, can get pretty angry about this on an everyday basis, even the most mentally tough people, because it's real. The microaggressions are real. The micro insults are real. The micro assaults are real. And it takes us a toll, like I said, on one's psychology. And so there's not an easy way to answer that question, rather, in terms of like overcoming that every day. but it does take an emotional toll, and I would then recommend folks sort of reaching out to their resources of help, their sources of help, right? Whether it be a psychotherapist or a friend, and connect and show commonality in terms of, hey, are you experiencing this on a daily basis? Yeah, me too. Yeah, man, this is tough. It's hard, right? And so if the more you share these feelings and commonalities with each other, the more you can build that resilience every day, because it's out there. Those external factors really hurt people, and they become debilitating, and it's hard, right? So I don't know. I'm interested in what others might think. How do they overcome? How do persons of color overcome these daily instances of racial discrimination? I'm interested in learning from you as well.
Thanks, Dr. Allen. I think we had a question from Fabio. Did you have a question? No? Okay. I think Nina and George, you're next.
I just kind of had a comment with all of the, what is the wording? Stigmatism behind the older generation really not believing that we can actually speak to somebody outside of immediate religion, family, and whatnot.
Race.
I almost feel like they think that if we go to somebody outside of our culture, that we would adapt being Americanized. Like the person that we talk to that's a therapist or whoever will tell us, well, your culture is wrong. You shouldn't do what your culture says. And I almost feel like that's why the older generation not discriminates, but discourages or doesn't acknowledge that we as younger people can get help outside of our culture, because maybe they think that we'll be brainwashed not to do everything that we have been taught when we grow up. Does that make sense?
Sure it does, babe.
Good answer.
Yeah.
No, I mean, because we're such a strong culture itself, they feel like if we go outside and talk to somebody that's not within our culture, that they're going to break everything that they have taught us to do. Obey your parents, do this on Sundays, don't do that. So I feel like that if they go through anybody goes through to a therapist, that's what's going to happen, that they discourage that because they're afraid they're going to lose everything they've ever taught their child, everything that they've ever learned to do or what to do or whatnot, because being in America, they may not have the same beliefs, cultures, or whatever rules that you've grown up with.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of what I think that is discouraging about the generations that weren't raised here, because they don't exactly know what America expects. And then to have us go to a professional American is like undoing all of their teachings and their beliefs.
This
Yeah,
is coming from a Palangi girl. No, I'm just kidding. She's not Palangi. She's Palangi Loy. But anyways, though, I would like to address Carol's question. Me and Dr. Allen, we actually grew up together, and we faced a lot of racial discrimination growing up. We did. I mean, I remember going to a skating rink and getting threatened to beat up, and the only reason why we didn't get beat up is because we had older brothers that, just the name alone that protected us. But I remember, as in growing up, our main method of protecting ourselves from racial discrimination is that we were together. And as friends, we never let anybody get away with anything. If you came at us with any kind of racial anything, as friends, we addressed the situation immediately. So our resilience was built together as a group of friends. When we grew up, we didn't grow up really racially discriminated because we didn't let anybody do that to us. And we grew up in White Kearns, Utah. Yeah, Dr. Allen's a Kearns boy. He's a K-Town boy, just in case he might not tell you, but I tell you right now, I'm really proud of my brother. But anyways, though,
K-Town for life. K-Town for life, George.
That's right. But I really think our resilience is built on how we grow up. I mean, you grow up and you have a certain group of individuals that are always there with you to watch your back, whether it's in school, whether it's in sports, outside of school. As you get older, you always have that support. And it wasn't just the Polynesians. We actually had a big group of everybody. And I think that's why we grew up like the way we are. Kawika is really successful. He's a professor. I'm a professional thief and pimp. If anybody needs any help with any of that stuff.
Okay, can we mute him? So thank you, George.
Okay, thank you.
For your, can you mute?
I'm located in Bountiful.
So I think that, but George makes a good point, is that the collective is also a really good support. I see two questions, Trina and then Paul.
Well, hi everyone, or as I like to say, Yagwe from the Marshall Islands. I am actually joining as part of MEI. We are a nonprofit organization here in Springdale, Arkansas. So it's a great, I'm so happy to be a part of this opportunity and, this conference. It's amazing. But I've learned a lot, and I really wanted to go back to what Melissa and Mighty Paul said earlier. Growing up here in the States, I was born in the Marshall Islands, but I came to the States when I was 1. So I have no idea what it is to, live on the island. I don't know, but I just know like the mentality is so different from here. And what we do in MEI is we educate, and we love to educate. And that's what we do, is we educate. And knowing a lot and learning a lot through MEI, like the older generation, their perspectives and everything is totally different. And with us, Manip is really, really heavy and strong with us. And growing up in the States, they expect a lot from us, from the younger generation. And using this term crazy, there really isn't, a word for it in our language either. And I have an autistic son. So, when I go to family functions or, birthdays and stuff like that, like, they're like, oh, they use this word, or they say crazy, but, we don't really talk about stuff like this. Like, we don't really educate each other that, like, there's more to it than just, oh, this person is crazy. There's, so it's nice that, like, being a part of this conversation at this conference and knowing so much, and having these connections with you guys, like, it's just, it's nice. Like, I'm really honored that I was really a part of this. And thank you all. Like, I love all the feedbacks and everything. Like, it's awesome. I just wanted to say a little, so I'm sorry. But yeah.
Thank you, Trina. Go ahead, Paul.
I'm just gonna back up with what Trina just said. And going back, I think our older generation were such great storytellers that in their mind, they even had their own reality built into their optics when they would do something, when it came to talking about mental health, right? So being of Tongan descent, I have probably one of the most infamous, quote unquote, crazy peoples on the island. He went by the name 39, Toluhiva. And the thing about him, and so I always grew up with, oh, that's because your uncle's crazy. That was the jab. If you wanted to get to me, or if you wanted to talk smack about my family, you always threw his name under the bus. And everyone kind of either laughed it off or was like, oh, that we just got to take it. But he did not become mentally ill until he was beat up because somebody lied to him and said that his dad was being hung at one of the last hangings in Tonga. So he couldn't stop crying. So the teacher said, look, if you don't stop crying, I'm gonna make you stop crying. It's what he actually did. The violence that occurred to him incurred it to the point where he really lost his faculties. Now, I'm only sharing this because I think part of us changing the narrative, part of us moving forward and empowering the new generation, the new people to understand this, it comes down to us as storytellers. Like, I noticed that when I tell my uncles that you should go to the doctors, they go. But if you say the word therapist, they don't understand that. So no, that's crazy. They're like, no. So I stopped talking about mental health as going to therapy. I actually said, look, you need to go to the doctor so he can help you with your issues. They actually would listen to me say that because the doctor had the authority. The word therapist still hasn't quite made its way into our shores yet. It's stuck out in the ocean somewhere. But the word therapy and doctor, even though it's the same treatment, they have different principles. To them, the authority of being a doctor is much easier for them to swallow than to say, you need to go to therapy, or you need to go to, you know, some sessions of this. And to use this as an example, one of my dear friends who's 50, who just turned 57, has been suicidal since he was 8. And my parents knew that, and my parents would say, man, I hope he gets some help from the doctors. But then when I said, no, he needs a therapist, my parents said, no, he doesn't need a therapist, he just needs a doctor. That's how they understood things. And to this day, he's now 57. He still fights depression. He still fights these things, but he's been able to get help in that space, which is what's kept him alive. And he thanks the Lord every day that he's alive. He's clean, sober, and all this stuff. But he actually did need help from the age of 8. And, you know, my parents finally understood that, got to the point, rest their soul, that there is more to mental health than just medication, than symptoms, than actions. There's actually, you know, like you said, Dr. Kawika, you guys actually go to school for this. This is part of your learning how to apply these things. And it's unfortunate that we don't have a lot more Pacific Islander doctors in the space, which would probably help dissipate the anxiety that comes along with mental health, which is, again, this is not me trying to pimp up my hour next tomorrow, but Dr. Foliaka is the only Tongan psychiatrist in New Zealand in the whole mental health system. And what he sees and understands in this space, he needs more. And he would love to give people, like, honestly, if I had a kid right now, I would make him go talk about forcing him to be a doctor. I don't care what doctor you become. I want you to be a psychiatrist, 100%. Because we need it. We as a people need this.
Awesome. That's powerful. I felt the mana. Thank you so much. Melissa, do we have just a couple minutes? I just want to address a few things. Lastly, is that okay?
You can do whatever you want, Dr. Allen.
Oh, no. I just wanted to share. I'm just feeling very empowered and feeling uplifted by Paul and George and Nine and others who have shared. You know, I forgot to mention, I am actually part Hawaiian, part Tongan. I come from Bloomfield ancestry. And so talking about identity and cultural identity, my mother was half Tongan. Her father was Bloomfield. And identity, ethnic identity and cultural identity can be very, very powerful to find yourself, to find meaning in your life, to find meaning in your identity and feel good about who you are. And so I've seen research around this. I've taught about this multiple times. Identity is crucial for our livelihood and for our well-being. Absolutely, ethnic identity. While at the same time, I want to address what Nine was saying, and she was saying, you know, sometimes ethnic identity or our cultures may get in the way of things, right? Like Paul was saying, they kind of get in the way of certain things. And Abby in our presentation was showing that in some regards, like there's the results are mixed. Ethnic identity shows some positive well-being and a salient identity and cultural identity. Yes, that's great. While at the same time, it also shows that ethnic identity actually prevents us from going out and reaching out to others, psychological services, and a professional, because the ethnic identity is so robust, so strong, so salient in who we are, our cultural values of, no, we don't need that. We don't need to go to speak to someone about this because it's not important. You go to a doctor, but you don't go to a therapist because that brings shame, that brings embarrassment and shame to our families. That brings, you know, we don't want our names to be out there and one of our kids or somebody to have mental health issues, right? Or mental illness, because we have a name to protect and a reputation to preserve, right? And so in some ways, ethnic identity may not be may not serve to help us in terms of mental health counseling. And so I just wanted to share that with you. I think that what Paul and Melissa and others, Nine and George were saying, it's very, very important to build this resilience and also destigmatize, decrease the stigma around getting help, and normalize it and making it okay for people to go and seek out help.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. Are there any other comments? Miss Lori, I don't want to call you out, but you've been so active in chat and you have wonderful questions. I just wanted to give you a quick moment if you had anything you wanted to add already.
So we have a new emotional resilience class that we're rolling out globally, actually, and would just love your insight on the best way to offer that to the community. How in terminology, of course, we work with priesthood leadership, but maybe some insight that way on how to bring it to an awareness and allow it to be accepted.
I think that was for you, Dr. Allen, or Lori, were you directing your question towards anybody or?
Yeah, to council, Dr. Allen, anyone, recommendations?
Hi, Lori, this is Susie. Just asking, is it for Pacific Islanders?
It's for everyone in the world. So it's not honed in on specific cultures, it's for everyone. So it's one manual.
Yeah, I feel like one size doesn't fit all.
Well, we could give it I'd like to give it a go, you know, and don't learn.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was on mute, and so I guess how I would just respond to that is, it's certainly an option, and for folks that could connect to that type of treatment or that sort of help, could go absolutely, because you know, someone said one size fits all. That's not the case always, you know. So for one person, going to your type of treatment could definitely benefit them, but for others it might need a different angle, a different way of looking at help, right? And partly it really comes down to who are the Polynesian therapists, Pacific Islander helpers out there who are willing to reach out to our own people. I think the trust needs to stay within the culture, and we need more people within our culture to reach out, because there's already a distrust reaching outwardly to other folks that might not understand us or might judge us or might pathologize us, right? What I mean by that is they may think we're, you know, crazy or psychotic just because we deal with problems differently. So, I'm a little concerned about others outside of our community thinking about that sort of way of, you know, resolving our problems and pathologizing who we are. And so I'm just a little concerned, but it could be an option for many, right? At the same time.
It's true. So we wouldn't call it going to the doctor because it's not designed to replace therapy or replace that licensed support, if that's a level that they have been identified as, right? It's more of a coping skills, but thank you.
Yeah. That sounds like it could help.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And if there aren't any more questions or comments, we've come to the conclusion of this portion of the conference.